Soon after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, SpaceX started shipping Starlink terminals to Ukraine, so that families, but also hospitals, government and financial institutions could have access to the internet with a broadband connection. However, the Ukrainian army quickly learned that they could use Starlink for military purposes, for example to control drones and to attack Russian forces. This was not part of the agreement between the Ukrainian government and SpaceX, which does not want its technology to be used for war purposes. And so Elon Musk announced in one of his tweets that SpaceX would interrupt the service for military purposes, or, more specifically, would prevent the potential of a World War III. Luckily for the Ukrainians, SpaceX is not the only technology company they can depend on for communication. Cloudflare is a company based in San Francisco that offers a range of cloud services to companies all over the globe. The focus is on privacy and security for every connection that a company has with the internet. Matthew Prince is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Cloudflare and was part of a panel at the World Economic Forum. He talks about how Cloudflare and big tech companies are supporting the country in defending herself from cyber attacks while staying in touch with the rest of the world. But Ukraine is not the only country involved, and some of the actions behind the scenes are quite surprising.
So if we go back to a year ago today, we were starting to see indicia coming out of the region that made us very worried that Russia was going to invade. And so we immediately reached out to authorities that we work with, got in contact with the Ukrainian government, and provided our services to protect their critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. When the invasion actually happened, we terminated any Russian government-affiliated customers from using our infrastructure. And then we worked with law enforcement and experts to say, what should we do next? And while there were some calls for us to pull out entirely, what we saw when we talked to the US government, when we talked to European governments, was that there was an important need for organizations like Navalny's group Bellingcat, which is a Cloudflare customer, to be able to still get their message out. And they are themselves constantly under attack from Russian authorities. And so in order to protect them, we had to have some of our infrastructure still running inside of the country, and we made that determination that that was the right thing to do. Again, we don't pay taxes there anymore, we don't service any sanctioned entities, any government-affiliated entities, but there are still Russians who think that what's happening in Ukraine is what it is, which is an incredible travesty and potentially a war crime.
The support was not only in the war rooms, but also for families and members of the opposition that wanted uncensored information.
The other thing that we've done is that we have provided our services to individual Russian households that want to bypass the censorship that Russia is imposing on the internet to be able to actually access Western media. And today we estimate that around 10% of Russian households are using Cloudflare's technology to bypass that censorship. We actually see consumption of Western media going up, and I'm hopeful, although again, it is awfully hard to overcome such an all-powerful regime in a country like Russia as Putin's, but I'm hopeful that if we do see changes inside of Russia, it will be in part because some people there are getting the truth.
The initiatives are not taken independently, but have to be in line with the US policy and coordinated with the authorities, something that probably SpaceX didn't do, judging from the exchange between Elon Musk and the White House, once again on Twitter. The initiatives taken by Cloudflare were very effective, to the point that the White House invited Cloudflare to do the same for other regions that support Russia and are hostile to the USA, like Iran. In some cases, this is possible. In others, there are limitations.
What's interesting, though, is while we were doing this, a lot of the protests erupted in Iran, and we've watched Iran shut down the internet. And I got a call from a senior official in the White House who said, "Can you do in Iran what you're doing in Russia?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because sanctions prevented us from ever putting our equipment in Iran. And so the same way that we can help the Russian people bypass censorship, we're unable to do that in Iran. And they said, what if we give you a license? And I said, it's too late, right?
Cloudflare is not alone in supporting Ukraine in the digital battlefield. In fact, several big tech companies started working on this kind of scenarios back in 2014, when Crimea was invaded by Russia.
The number of places that were sanctioned that there are sanctions that apply. I mean, the North Korean internet is tiny.
Right.
We still see a huge amount of the Iran traffic because it's going to western parts of the world. If you look at traffic coming out of Crimea, I mean, people are accessing YouTube and other things. And so the very nature of the internet is that it is an interconnected system. And so even in Iran, the really amazing thing is that Iran keeps turning the internet off, but they turn it back on when their stock market is open, because they can't actually operate their stock market without being connected to the rest of the internet. And again, that gives me hope that we actually have created a system that even in repressive authoritarian regimes is very hard for them to put the horse back in the barn. But I think the thing to watch is, will Iran, will Russia, will they be able to create the same sort of controlled and censored internet that China created from day one, right? China never let the horse out of the barn.
Yes.
And so now the question is, if countries can put the horse back in the barn, then I think that is what I would start to get very concerned about. And so far, I don't think anyone has been able to successfully do that. Even in Russia, if you're in Russia, you're using Cloudflare technology, you can access Western media, you can see what's actually going on in Ukraine. And again, that gives me hope. That's not true in China, because they never let the horse out. And so I think that's what I'm watching really carefully. Can Iran create their own Chinese version of the internet? Can Russia create their own Chinese version of the internet? And if that can happen, then I agree that starts to be a problem. But until that happens, I think we actually have quite a bit of hope to see what's going on, because the internet is inherently global.
In these situations, tech companies can contribute in ending the conflict not by competing but by sharing their data so that they can be analyzed with artificial intelligence. And this is exactly what is happening in the battlefield.
The first thing about AI is that the challenge isn't the algorithms. The algorithms are pretty simple, pretty standard. The challenge is the data. And whoever has the most data wins the AI game. And so the thing that makes me optimistic in this space is that there are more good guys than there are bad guys. And when you look at a company like Cloudflare, the fact that so much of the internet, between 20 and 25% of the web, sits behind our network, gives us this incredible vantage point to be able to stay ahead of the bad guys. And I think that will allow us to continue to go forward. And one of the topics in cybersecurity has always been data sharing. We've been talking about that since I first came to WEF back in 2012, and frankly, for 12 years before that. But AI accelerates the need for that amongst the good guys working together. And so if we can share that data and feed that back into the systems, if we can work together in order to understand the threats that we all face, then I'm actually optimistic that AI gives us an accelerant to help stay in front of the threats that are there. And even though there are risks, again, the fact that there are more good guys than bad guys, the fact that we can work together when we create ways to cooperate, I think those are the things that actually make me optimistic that we can stay in front of the threats that are coming.